Okay, so you can see we're looking at one of the footboards now. And you can see, hopefully you can see some of the spots around here. We've had a split in the planks, and that's allowed the paint to sort of flake up. And you can see how I can just gently scrape along like that and get the worst of it off. And you feel with your finger, you can actually feel there's a high spot there too. So what we may want to do is take some sandpaper to that high spot to sand it down. You can also see here where there's been some paint runs in the past. Again, you might be able to scrape those off. May work better scraping with the pole scraper. On that, I do need to get the new blade for that. And you then have areas, normally high traffic areas, so there's lots of wear and tear, where just a little nick of paint comes up and then water ingresses underneath. As you can see, what's probably happened here. And you scrape away at that and right here. The point here is you don't want to scrape off all the paint. You want to scrape off the loose paint. Where it's good paint, where it's still adhering strongly to the surface and protecting the surface, there's no point in scraping that off or removing that, because all you're going to have to do is replace good paint with good paint. You know, you're doubling up your effort. You really don't want to do that. So you're looking for where the paint is flaking, and then you're trying to figure out just where that flaky paint ends and where the good paint starts. You can use a forward motion to scrape at it, being careful not to dig in too hard. You can see how it flakes up here on the edges very easily. And also sometimes on the edges and places you can do a back scrape with the scraper. Sometimes it's just picking the right one at that point. With this one, quite sharp, so you do need to be careful you don't dig into the wood and bring up chips of wood. And you've got to make sure to get in all the cracks and crevices. So for somewhere like this, we've actually got quite a long crack around the length, getting the edge of it in and scraping out those loose bits, breaking it up. That will give us more surface and a better surface to get new paint into. So don't be afraid of getting right in there and scraping that out. We've got a couple of runs here. Let's try the little sharper one to get the run out, and you can see how we're taking that run out of the paint and bringing it level, and how that scraper works to level this bit off, take that run of the paint out. And with the same here. When you're doing these things, it's not too bad when you've got thick layers of paint on, but a lot of the time just think about the direction the grain of the wood is, particularly when you're sanding. That's when that will come in and be important. You can see how by scraping here, on this bit, by scraping, that allows me to get the worst of it up from the edges without chipping up the good paint. So you can sort of see the layers here where there's been undercoat and primer and stuff on, where it's still good, that I don't want to pull it up by scraping in that way. So by pulling it back, it gets the worst out. And that pretty much needs done for all of it. And it's, for some bits it's dead easy. Big flat plank like this, you might find one little bit. I always like to keep a brush to hand so I can clean up as I'm going, and it allows me to see what's going on. And using your fingertips too, you don't want to get shards or splinters in your fingers, but using them too, sometimes your fingertips will tell you something that your eyes won't, and that is obviously very useful. So this will need done for all of it. Once that loose paint is scraped off, the next step will be, as we discussed, to clean the boards down. And you can see, just looking at it, there's a little layer of grime and dirt. If you were to paint over the top of that now, even if you'd sanded it down, the paint would not adhere strongly to the layer of paint beneath, and it would just flake off very quickly. So using this type of solution, the Krud Kutter, the HG stuff, or sugar soap, will break down that layer of grease nice and quickly. If these were fresh boards, new boards, the next step after that would be to, on a new piece of wood, to identify all the knots. So knots are very, very resinous, and when you paint over the top, that resin leaks out, and it causes issues. It'll either show through the paint, or it'll cause the paint to peel off and flake off from that point. So this is a knotting solution, which would paint on those knots, which gets soaked into and sucked into the knots and stops that resin from leaking out. So we've stripped off that loose paint. we've got all that loose paint off, and we've cleaned it down, and we now need to sand it. So we sand for a number of reasons, and we sand at different sandpaper strengths for a number of reasons. And I'll go into some more detail in a separate video, but the point is that sanding smooths the surface, so you get a smooth finish, so you don't have bumps and lumps like you saw here with the paint on. So you can use it to, in between painting, if you find there's runs or rivulets, you can use a sandpaper to smooth those out. But it also does a thing called keying the surface. So when you have a beautiful smooth flat coat, it can be very hard for another layer of paint to adhere to it and stick to it. So by keying the surface, by giving it a little like sand, put little tiny microscopic scratches into the surface, and those microscopic scratches give something for the next layer of paint to adhere to grip onto, to give it mechanical actual adhesion. You can see there where it's just rubbing off a little bit as such. Once that's keyed, it then needs, you would normally wipe it down with some like turps or white spirit to pick up all the dust and get it off, or take an air blower to it to pull that dust off, and that's it then prepped and ready to paint. Hope that all makes sense. Again, as I keep saying, I'll be on hand to help and assist and advise as we're going through and doing this. Don't be afraid to ask me any questions, and don't forget to wear your PPE.